Alien Covenant is the highly anticipated sequel to one of the most confusing and frustrating films probably in cinematic history, Ridley Scott's Prometheus. What Alien Covenant succeeds at the most is putting this Alien prequel movie saga back on the track of horror, gore, and mostly fully formed aliens, instead of whatever the hell this thing was, and I'll explain more about that later. Unfortunately, in my opinion, Alien Covenant does suffer from a lot of the same fatal flaws that its predecessor had. So before I go any further, keep in mind, everything you hear from here on out has major movie ruining spoilers to Alien Covenant, so you've been warned. So the biggest flaw in Prometheus was how many unanswered questions it left viewers with at its conclusion, and Alien Covenant only answers a few of those questions, but unfortunately leaves viewers asking even more afterwards. So also keep in mind, since the film does not answer a lot of these questions, most of my answers are just interpretation to how I understand the story. The questions I'm left with, not including the ones still unanswered from the Prometheus film, are how did David's android end up on the Covenant at the end of the film instead of the newer, more superior Walter android model? How was David able to give orders to the Covenant ship's AI, Mother, which he should not have been able to do or had access to since he was not part of the crew's original team? What will the purpose of the two facehugger embryos be that David stored on the ship? Why did David kill Elizabeth Shaw? Did Shaw actually send the Covenant that message of her singing the John Denver song? Why was David seen with tears in his eyes as he went all Farah from Overwatch and made justice rain from above on the engineers on their home planet? Why was this mysterious planet they landed on never scanned or even noticed when the Covenant decided to make this colonization mission? And how far away is David from creating a fully formed xenomorph from the first Alien movie? And how many more Alien films does Ridley Scott have planned for the future? So the quick answer to most of these questions has to be that David, who's been pulling all the strings all along, killed all the creators on their home planet so he could perfect his xenomorph creation, but realized he needed more human specimens to continue his research and development. He sent the Covenant a message in order to pull off the most complicated vehicle hijacking in human history, and now he'll continue his research on Origai 6. A hijacking so ridiculous and overthought that even a franchise like the Fast and Furious films would say, "That's ridiculous, there's no way that could happen, unless he did it for family." But be sure to comment below what you think and if you have a better quick answer. Anyway, that's the short answer. Now here's the long one that goes into far more detail. As for the ending and how David ended up on the Covenant instead of Walter, initially I'm sure most people were feeling a little uneasy about whether or not it was Walter or David who had boarded the ship as the remaining crew make their escape. All the clues pointed to Walter, mainly his left hand was still missing after saving Daniels earlier in the film, as well as the android having Walter's voice. But the twist comes when Daniels asks who she thinks is Walter if he'll help her build the log cabin that she and her husband James Franco's character planned on building when they arrive on Origai 6. But because David has never heard this story before, he stares at her a bit cluelessly, and now Daniels realizes that she will most likely suffer the same grim fate as Elizabeth Shaw. But how did Walter become David? There are two possibilities. The one that seems the most unlikely and required the most steps was that David merely burned off his own hand with the blood of the dead neomorph that was nearby, somehow fixed his own voice box after Walter Krav Maga throat punched him multiple times, then he switched clothes with him. But the one I believe is most likely is David transferred his AI conscious into Walter's body after rendering him temporarily immobile with the knife he grabbed, just like when he stabbed him in the neck with his recorder. You know, kinda like Ghost in the Shell, but without all the racist Hollywood whitewashing. This switch also explains why he was able to communicate with the Covenant ship's AI, Mother, and that she accepted all his requests. But I'm sure that'll bring up another conspiracy which I'll get into later. So once David entered the Covenant, he still must have had multiple samples of the black goo with him, as well as the two facehugger embryos that he later regurgitated. One sample he put into the open wound of Lope when he had rebandaged his burnt face, thus resulting in the last protomorph we see in the film attack most of the remaining crew. Not actually a fully formed xenomorph yet like we see in the first Alien film. There are a few clues as to why this isn't the final form of the creature. While most could say that with advances in film and special effects, whether it be cosmetic or CGI digital effects, an argument can be made that this is the new 21st century idea of a xenomorph, but there's a lot of evidence that says it's not the final alien form. First, the limbs protrude out quite a bit more than the 1979 version, while that version seemed to be more human because, obviously in reality it's a dude in the costume, not a CGI protomorph. But the real evidence being that while David has been on the engineer home planet, he has been doing nothing but playing God, trying to create the perfect specimen by crossbreeding the black goo with all the insects and wildlife on the planet. So this all points to David being the creator of the final form of the xenomorph that we will see eventually in the first Alien film. but as for now, it's not quite there yet. If you remember in Covenant in David's egg room, these eggs are much bigger than in any future Alien film in the timeline. But let me back up a bit about David being a creator, to the scene where he's seen crying as he kills everyone on the engineer planet. I really wish we had seen more of them, but what David does by killing them, with what we think we don't entirely know yet as their own creation of all the vessels containing the black goo virus, is a bit of poetic justice. But it's David's tears that are the most troubling. It's safe to say that David now considers himself a god, much like his creator Wayland from the Covenant's opening scene. But he considers himself more of a creator than a destroyer. However, he understands and says that sometimes to create we must destroy. When Walter and David first meet, and David is surprised by the upgrades to the Walter model, Walter basically says that the Weyland-Yutani company have stopped making them like David because the humans are feeling a bit uncomfortable around them. But David is more upset at the Walter model because they no longer allow the newer ones to be creators like David was. So it brings David no joy to kill anybody, but he does understand that it's the price to pay for evolution. As for the reason he killed Elizabeth Shaw, we're unsure at what point he actually killed her. All we can assume is that Shaw was the first victim of David's chestburster protomorph experiment, and David saw how close he was to perfection and realized he needed more human subjects to continue his research, so he sent a signal of Elizabeth Shaw singing to the Covenant so they would land on this planet and he could hijack their ride. A ride made by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, a multi-billion-dollar company who has their hand in everything, that most likely wants David to experiment on human subjects so they can weaponize the xenomorph once it has completely finished evolving. So that begs the final question, how many more goddamn prequels are we gonna get of this Alien franchise until it pulls off a Star Wars Rogue One and ends the prequel concurrently with the beginning of the first 1979 Alien film? Really briefly, Ridley Scott has done several interviews, sometimes saying one thing, sometimes saying something completely different. All we know that is fact until he changes it for now is that a sequel will be called Alien Awakening, as the title was accidentally leaked some time ago. He and a team are currently writing the script. Filming will begin in about 14 months from now, and that Scott is intentionally leaving these huge open-ended questions at the end of these films because it is leading to something huge. Anyway, that's everything I have for the actual ending explained of Alien Covenant. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below, and tell me your thoughts on the film. Also comment if there was anything that I missed that you want to discuss in the comments, and anything else, like do you really think David will be the one to make the first xenomorph, or is it still the engineers? Are there other engineer factions that we're not aware of somewhere out in the universe? And will Sigourney Weaver ever cameo as Ellen Ripley in any upcoming prequel? And don't forget, as always, this is 5 Things Explains Everything with the Fingerbang Show. I'll do the fingering.